They're not just propagandizing in the present, progressives are also rewriting the past. Not just the details, not just some characters in the past that they're going to tweak a little bit. They are rewriting now the fundamental purpose of the American Revolution, and they're winning Pulitzer Prizes for it. New York Times just won a Pulitzer Prize, and the Pulitzer Prize came for its reporting on the 1619 Project. The 1619 Project traces American history back to the arrival of the first African slave in the American colonies. Now, even the history of how slavery developed in the American colonies is a complex one. It's not actually purely a racial thing, as the New York Times would have you believe. But that's not, look, we're not even getting into the details here. We're just talking about the fundamental premise. The piece that won them the Pulitzers by Nikole Hannah-Jones, it's called "Our Democracy's Founding Ideals Were False When They Were Written. Black Americans Have Fought to Make Them True." And ironically, or perhaps not, the piece that they won their Pulitzer for is fundamentally incorrect. So it begins, "My dad always flew an American flag in our front yard." Skip a little bit. "When I was young, that flag outside our home never made sense to me. How could this black man, having seen firsthand the way his country abused black Americans, how it refused to treat them as full citizens, proudly fly its banner? I didn't understand his patriotism. It deeply embarrassed me." So at least she's admitting off the top that she hates her country, right? Okay, got to get points for honesty. Here we get to the false claim. "Conveniently left out of our founding mythology is the fact that one of the primary reasons the colonists decided to declare their independence from Britain was because they wanted to protect the institution of slavery." That is not true. There are many academic historians who wrote into the New York Times to say that that was not true, and the New York Times ignored them. There is no evidence for that whatsoever. There's a lot of evidence to the contrary. For instance, in the Declaration of Independence, one of the chief complaints against the British, one of the reasons for which they were declaring independence, is because they blamed the British for foisting slavery on them, slavery which they detested. And then, of course, later on when they write the Constitution, the issue of slavery is a big controversy because there were many people who were drafting that Constitution who wanted to abolish slavery altogether. There were many people who did not want slavery to give a reward to the South as a matter of representation in Congress. And so they had to arrive at a compromise, and they had to sunset the importation of slaves, which they did in the Constitution, and then ultimately the inevitable Civil War came to end slavery. Nothing about this is true. This was then roundly... Oh, there's also another false claim in here, which is pretty funny. The woman who wrote it doesn't even know when the Declaration of Independence was signed. So initially she wrote that it was signed on July 4th, but actually the signing began a couple weeks later on August 2nd. So, or more than a couple weeks later on August 2nd. So already you've got the Pulitzer Prize winning essay that has multiple corrections, right? A correction, an editor's note, and yet the Pulitzer Committee still gave it to them. Including supporters of the 1619 Project, you had lots of academic historians say that this was trash. Northwestern University professor Leslie Harris writes of this. "On August 19th of last year, I listened in stunned silence as Nikole Hannah-Jones, a reporter for the New York Times, repeated an idea that I had vigorously argued against with her fact checker, that the Patriots fought the American Revolution in large part to preserve slavery in America. I vigorously disputed the claim. Although slavery was certainly an issue in the American Revolution, the protection of slavery was not one of the main reasons the 13 colonies went to war." So this historian and many other historians spoke to the Times about this, said, guys, we support the project. We support making slavery a big focus when you're writing the history of America. But just as a matter of history, this is not factually correct. And they ignored her, which is a pattern for the New York Times. You know, in 2018, the New York Times shared a Pulitzer Prize for its reporting on Russiagate, which, as you might recall, is a complete hoax. A complete hoax perpetrated by the left and the media, but I repeat myself, and which is one of the reasons that President Trump can't be so nice with everybody all the time, is because you've got the entire apparatus of modern liberalism trying to completely destroy this man. Now they're trying to destroy American history as well. And it's not just happening in the pages of the New York Times. If it were, it wouldn't matter because very few people read the New York Times. But the 1619 Project is now being taught in schools. This anti-historical trash is being taught in schools as though it were history. Over the disputations of academic historians who support the New York Times, who support the project. But even they are honest enough, doesn't matter. This will be taught in schools. And as we were discussing yesterday on the show, with regard to Phyllis Schlafly and the rewriting of history on the Equal Rights Amendment, this is the kind of stuff that's going to be remembered. The narrative is going to be remembered, and the real history increasingly is going to be forgotten. That's why they're rewriting it in the first place.